Driven by a passion for the vital role public gardens play in communities, she works to maintain the design integrity of Lurie Garden while facilitating its continuous evolution. Additionally, she ensures Millennium Park maintains a high standard of horticulture by prioritizing both its beauty and its ecological function. Prior to this, Kathryn held positions in horticulture and public programming at the Chicago Botanic Garden, where I met her because I work there, so it was nice to see you again. She began her career in habit restoration, contributing to key efforts throughout the San Francisco Bay Area with the Golden Gates Park Conservancy, Muir Woods National Monument, and the Marin Municipal Water District. Kathryn earned her Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Michigan. Go Blue. Without further ado, Kathryn.
Okay, can you hear me all right? Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you both to the Skokie Public Library and Rachel and the rest of the Skokie Beautification Commission. I'm really happy to be here and share a bit more about Lurie Garden. And today is actually my 5-year anniversary at Lurie Garden, so it's a milestone for me. So I'll just give you a little bit of roadmap. I'm going to talk about the history of the park, Lurie Garden, Pete Outolf's design principles, ecological gardening, as well as the evolution of the garden. So we're going to hit a lot of different stuff here, and as mentioned, we will have some questions at the end. So starting with the history and design of the park. Millennium Park is located downtown Chicago in the middle of the Loop. It's a 24.5-acre urban rooftop park, and it's located amongst skyscrapers, cultural institutions. Lake Michigan is a block away. Raise your hand if you've been there. Okay, whew. But it wasn't once as beautiful as it is now. It was previously a park and a railroad and a parking lot run by the Illinois Central Railroad. And through a collaboration of city officials, as well as a dedicated group of philanthropists, the concept for the park was born. Now, this land for Millennium Park needed to be created. As you previously saw, there was a big pit that was a parking lot and the railroad. And so they came up with the concept of these layers. So there's a parking garage below, there's roads that run underneath, there's a busway that goes down to McCormick Place, and then the park sits on top as a green rooftop, which presents a lot of different interesting considerations as we manage a space like that. So the key point being shallow soil depths. So when it was all said and done, this free and open park that was built for the people of Chicago showcased art, architecture, culture, and landscape design. And it's pretty, I think this picture is a really good representation of what that space is, looking at that large stretch of green right downtown amongst the skyscrapers. So Lurie Garden is in that southeast corner of Millennium Park, and it's interesting, as the park was being developed, the group of philanthropists were pulling in different artists to create the Bean, Cloudgate, Crown Fountain, those other features. Frank Gehry did Pritzker Pavilion. But Lurie Garden was actually the only feature that they had a design competition for. And the design prompt for Lurie Garden was to create a botanic garden full of rare and unusual species. So remember that line. While all the other artists seem to be looking toward the future, and you can see that in the materials used, the shiny silvers that are littered across Millennium Park, the designers of Lurie Garden, GGN and Pete Outolf, wanted Chicago's history to have a place in this next millennium. And they did that with various nods in their materials choices. So, just an overview, the garden is 3 acres. It has over 350 taxa, meaning different species cultivar selections. There's a mix of both North American species as well as introduced plant species as well. The design is described as naturalistic. We say naturalistic is an easy way to say it, a little more in-depth version is a stylized interpretation of nature. So we're not trying to replicate nature, we're inspired by it. And so remembering that the prompt was rare and unusual species, and then they ended up using local species. So kind of funny how that worked out. And then I mentioned GGN's the landscape architecture firm that did the design. Pete Oudolf is the planting designer, and Jacqueline Vanderkloot is our bulb designer. And a key thing worth mentioning is that while the city owns Millennium Park, it is stewarded by the Millennium Park Foundation, my employer. And Lurie Garden itself is endowed, has an endowment through the Robert H. Lurie Foundation, and that funds everything we do, including our staff positions. We have 2 full-time staff, 2 seasonals, and then a team of volunteers that do both hands-on work in the garden as well as some docents. So some of the key design features that we can point towards GGN for this masterminding of the space. It's divided really into 2 sides. To the west is the light plate, and then to the east is the dark plate. The dark plate is dark because there's shade, there's trees and shrubs, but it's also a nod to Chicago's historic landscapes. It's meant to be a little more wild. The plant material is meant to be taller so you feel more immersed. Versus the light plate is open, sunny, you can see much more of it all at once. And the inspiration was that as you move towards the city, modernization, improvements are happening, and there's this more controlled landscape. This is the landscape architects, I'm telling you, their symbols are just out of this world. But that's how we talk about the garden, is those 2 sides. There's also a feature that runs down the center, that boardwalk, and the water feature there is known as the seam. The boardwalk is a reference to the city's previous sidewalks that were wood. And then also the water feature actually sits along a historic break wall line that was between the city and Lake Michigan. It's worth noting that the water feature had some issues that were pretty extensive, and we are actively repairing them right now. And so the garden is closed until July as we repair that feature. But when it is open later this summer, please do come and visit, because everybody loves to sit, linger at the water feature, dip their feet in. So it will be really wonderful to have that up and running. Another key feature is the shoulder hedge. This is that hedging that runs along the perimeter here. And it's made up of mostly arborvitae, but also broken up by some hornbeams and beeches as well for textural change. And this is actually one of the most demanding features of the garden. While we pride ourselves on being pretty low input, ecologically focused, the hedge is demanding in terms of water, attention from our arborist company. It gets pruned twice a year. It's very kind of opposite to what the interior bed is like, because it's very formal and very sharp. But the cool thing is it's actually about 1,300 individual trees that make up that whole hedge, and they're in rows. So when you go in there, you're in this kind of other world, and actually is really great for providing habitat. We see different creatures and birds come through there, and it's sort of like a passageway across the garden. And then the other part of the shoulder hedge is it dips in the center there, and you can see it kind of cradles Pritzker Pavilion. This was another design tactic to connect Lurie Garden to other parts of the park. So part of the reason it's called the shoulder hedge is, 1, a nod to a Carl Sandburg poem, and then 2, the designers saw the hedge as the shoulder pads of an 80s disco woman, and then the pavilion is her hair flying back. I like that one a little bit better. Another feature is called the bird border, more hedging, but this area was really basic, simple hedging planting, and then in 2018 it got a redesign. And The idea here is there's 14 different species that make up the bird border, all regional woody plant species that support birds by way of food, habitat, etc. And all while doing this, it acts as a natural border for the park. So as opposed to having kind of ugly, austere fencing, we have this natural border instead. So while much of the original landscape design in the park is alleys of trees, turf, and really simple functional plantings, the founders made a very important and impactful decision when they decided to include a garden as an art feature. And this was really revolutionary in that gardens can be very functional, they serve a purpose, but they can also be beautiful. And with Lurie Garden, the designers set the stage for landscapes to be viewed as such, to be viewed as living works of art. And it's art that shifts with the seasons, it changes constantly, both spontaneously and intentionally, and it stands as a stark contrast to the surrounding concrete of downtown. And Lurie Garden has then paved the way for horticultural improvements in other areas of the park. So 8 years ago, the foundation started working with a local designer, Austin Eichscheid, who is more or less a student of Pete Outhoff as well. And he started doing some of the container design, and then he did a trial area. And now we have 3 large areas that have been converted into these beautiful works of art. So this area started as Creeping Euonymus, which is an invasive plant. It looks extra depressing because it's early spring. And this is what it looks like now. So what previously offered little in the way of ecosystem services and dynamism is now a multi-season garden, highly diverse and continuing to evolve. And another area where the turf here really made little sense. You could picnic there, but with the growing trees, it was getting shadier and shadier and really difficult to keep the turf looking good. So this was another area that was converted by Austin Eichscheid's design. And these areas are also cared for by a local stewardship company that is more adept at these kind of ecological gardening practices. And then most recently, the foundation took advantage of timing with another city project. The Bean was closed for a period of time because they were replacing all the pavers around Cloudgate. And so we took this opportunity to update the gardens in this space. And now the new gardens complement our most famous art feature much more appropriately. And so as we start to view these gardens as art, we think of them as living, changing, creative spaces, and that opens ourselves up to higher expectations for our green spaces, and then also starts to invite wildlife in as well. So Pete Outhoff, our planting designer, he is probably considered the most famous designer of our time. He's from the Netherlands, and when he was first starting out, he started a nursery at his home, and with that, it grew into a design business. He has actually selected quite a great number of plants that we use in the industry today. And really, he is one of the kind of fathers of the new perennial movement. And the new perennial movement is a focus on using perennial plants in our garden design rather than just focusing on using annuals or kind of, it's opposing to that English style garden. More of an emphasis on multi-season interest, long-lived perennials, thinking about their structure when they're both blooming and not, and less of a focus on only the flower. So considering the plant as a whole. So you might also know Pete from his garden in New York City called the High Line. It's one of the most notable he's done, much to my chagrin. Lurie Garden was first. And some cool things about the High Line is that they are actually gardening in 18 inches of soil, which they like to remind us because we're gardening in 4 feet. Pete also has designed gardens all over the world, several in the UK, Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, South Korea, and each is unique but can be clearly identified as a Pete garden through some key characteristics. His love of the arts shows in how he thinks and talks about plants. You'll often find public works of art tucked amongst his gardens. And he often describes using plants as characters on a stage. So he thinks of it in a very animated way. He thinks of the plants acting as their own individual characters. And while he's done many private gardens, he does have a self-professed love for public projects, and many of the gardens that he's designed are free to see, with Detroit, the Out-Off Garden Detroit being a somewhat newer project. He believes gardens should be shared and experienced by the wider population, so he's really about making them accessible to people. So now we're going to get into some of his kind of key design principles and how those apply to Lurie Garden, and then the hope is that you can then take them into your own garden. So as I mentioned, we have about half of our plants are North American plant species. So Pete's ever-growing plant palette contains a robust number of our native plant species, which is interesting because he's from the Netherlands. And this all started because he and others were looking for greater diversity of plants to use. So they looked to North America, to the very diverse habitats of the prairies, the woodlands, and found inspiration in the plant species there. And then took many of those plants and brought them into the plant trade and where they were bred, reproduced, etc. Some of the reasons he really likes North American plant species is that they're particularly tough. They can handle extreme temperatures, and I will share a few of our favorite natives in Lurie Garden that I think are iconic to this space, with the first one being Echinacea pallida, the pale purple coneflower. This one is very dynamic, and I find it to be less susceptible to some of the disease issues that other Echinacea have issues with. And then even when they're kind of newly coming up and the petals are just small and vertical, they start creating their interest. And then they have this almost like jellyfish hula dancer look. And then as they go on into the season, they just get more and more interesting. So while the Salvia River is one of our more iconic features of the garden, right after that in June is when the echinaceas just explode, and it is a beautiful, just kind of winding river of pink. Really lovely to see. And echinacea are great in that they're adaptable, they seed readily, so you can have them kind of plant a few, and then they'll seed around your garden and show up more spontaneously. Monarda bradburyana, Eastern bee balm, this is another favorite. In April, you start to see its dark purple foliage come up. It's about 2 feet tall, and then it blooms in late spring, about May. It doesn't really seem to have an issue with powdery mildew as the summer blooming Monardas do more so. And then as we get into late summer and fall, the seed heads stay really intact and firm. And look wonderful. It's also, I find, really easy to use with a lot of other plants. It goes with a lot of different plants, which is wonderful. Dahlia purpurea. This is another wonderful plant it's a prairie plant. It's in the pea family, so it fixes nitrogen in the soil. It has that kind of more fine textured leaf and these really whimsical flower heads. Excuse me. So the cool thing is that plant people love to talk to other plant people, as we all know. So as P. Outolf his career has evolved, he's met different interesting people along the way, and some most notably are Roy Diblick, Rick Dark, and Neil Dybel, all who are huge native plant fans. Roy Diblick is a local plantsman. He has a nursery up in Wisconsin. He's also a designer. And these people are really instrumental in taking Pete around to our local prairies, habitats, and showing him more of our native species. So we can really thank some of his friends for expanding his palette. The other thing about the Dahlia purpurea that I wanted to mention is the pollen is more nutrient rich than your average pollen, so it's extra great for pollinators. I do find that when it's planted new, the rabbits do enjoy it, so a little protection early on is helpful. So purple poppy mallow, this one has pretty fat tuberous roots, and it's a great one for weaving and scrambling through the garden. It stays pretty low. If you have like a rock border or some kind of ledge, this is a great one to put right at that edge, because then it'll spill over. And sometimes like I forget about it, and then all of a sudden it just starts popping through other plants. So it's a tough one once it's established, and adds that really fun pop of pink. Okay, Sanguisorba canadensis. So we started to become a little bit obsessed with the Sanguisorbas, both native and non-native species. This one is a native species. It does well in wet areas, although we found with our mediocre amount of watering that it still is okay in full sun and a little drier soils. It has a really nice vertical component to it, so if you're looking for something that's kind of spiky, a little taller, and it's not very demanding, so it will mingle well with other plants, but it's got this kind of fun Dr. Seuss look to the flower. So the other tenet is that Pete, while he loves our North American plant species, he loves all plant species. And so you'll find, specifically in Lurie Garden, that we mix a lot of regional plant species along with introduced ones. And I'm not here to tell you to plant all native or, not. I just find that when you mix the two, it's a really good blend to get long-lasting color, to also kind of ease yourself into working with native plants as well. And it can also add a touch of formality to some, to a native plant garden. So I'll share some of our my favorite combinations. So in here we've got Joe Pyeweed up top with monkshood, and then the Galenia, Bowman's root. So this is a native, the Joe Pye is a native, and then over here you have this combination with Millennium, which is a non-native grass. And the thing that the aconitum, the monkshood, the blue one, is doing here is adding like a wow amount of color, and it really fills that kind of middle height zone. I also like monkshood because it sends out its foliage now. Like I can already see these nice groupings of it, and it's holding its space in a garden that is constantly fighting for space. So that is a really useful quality. And then we have a few different Millennias in the garden. And the great aspect about this grass is that it's kind of transparent, so it creates this misty kind of look where you can kind of see through it, but you can't. So if you're playing around with adding taller plants toward the edge of your garden bed, this is a good one to use because it won't feel so imposing. Another combo is the Andropogon big blue stem red October with a knotweed blackfield, and then Salvia yangii, which is the Russian sage. I like this combination just because the colors play really well together, where the knotweed, not the invasive knotweed, but an introduced species, this red picks up the colors in the big blue stems, red tones in here, and then the Russian sage is just a really long bloomer and brings a lot of different insects to the garden. So these are both actually, so you'll find that we have straight species, cultivars, introduced species, all sorts of a mix, and that's really to get certain features out of the plants. Here is a combination of two native species that are cultivars, Sanguisorba red thunder. It's native to the West Coast, so really not regional at all, but it plays well with the Solidago fireworks in that giving you that classic kind of fall color, and then the two different flower shapes really make it a little more interesting. The great thing, again, that I mentioned before about the different Sanguisorbas is that they're really airy, so that when they're in with other plants, they mix well together. You can just kind of pop them in here and there, and they'll add a bit of interest. And then actually the Sanguisorba was a selection by Pete Outhoff, so he does continue to select different kind of varieties of plants, and then they go into the trade. In this combination, we've got Limonium latifolium is this kind of airy plant down here, sea lavender. The wonderful thing about this one is it has a rosette of leaves at the base, which you can't see, and then a very wide, airy flower stem here. And it actually kind of acts as a support system if you have any floppier plants. And it gives us this nice kind of like nice base, and then we have our native Echinacea purpurea, the Asclepias incarnata coming out of there, and Eryngium yuccifolium. So these three natives are working well then with the limonium, which is sea lavender. And then lastly, one more combination, kind of a similar concept as before. We have the Calamantha down here, acting as a base in the planting with the Echinacea purpurea, the Agastache hyssop, and then the wild quinine over here. So all natives then working with a base of Calamantha. The great thing about that plant is that it's soft, it's long blooming, it'll be blooming into like November, December, the flowers start to turn a little bit of purple. But it's kind of that like, you don't have to focus on it too much, and then it supports those more interesting architectural plants that are around it. So another key tenet, which you may be already picking up of Pete's design principles, is diversity of shapes in the flower heads. Using a combination of shapes will do a number of things. So spire shape, that vertical is almost like an exclamation point. It grabs people's attention, versus rounder shapes kind of allow you to rest your eye a bit. And then the umbel can be a little more architectural. But that's focusing on, what we see as humans. Why we also want that diversity of flower shapes, plant textures, etc., is to support different types of insects and pollinators. So as many of you, I presume, know, bees are attracted to certain types of flowers, shapes of flowers, versus butterflies. So the more diversity of flower shapes you have, you're going to bring in a higher diversity of insects to your garden as well. And then you can see that kind of similar concept translating into later season interest, where you still have a lot going on in the garden, and then that is also food for other wildlife. Okay, so grasses and grass-like plants. This is probably the most important thing to remember. We need them, we need a lot of them. I firmly believe they are the key to a successful design. They create unity, they can be the base of a garden design, they also help simplify your planting. Using grasses, it's hard to fully articulate, but it provides, it's almost like, well, I'll use that analogy later, but it's really kind of a softness that we need to then highlight the other plants in our garden. I'll get a little more into it. Now, ecologically, they serve a couple purposes. Grasses are wonderful at suppressing weeds around them because many of them are a little wider and they'll cover the ground. So above ground, but then also below ground, you can see this is the root system of an echinacea. So very vertical, pretty thin, versus a grass next to it, how wide and fibrous it is. This is taking up space underground and taking away space from weeds that are trying to establish. So we want to both cover the ground above and below to have less weeds invading. The other thing that happens is these roots will parts of them will decompose every season, providing organic matter to your garden. So they're also a natural fertilizer, if you will. Some of the favorites, we have a lot of little blue stems and quite a few different varieties. This one is Blue Heaven. And the other feature of grasses that we really appreciate is their movement that they bring to the garden. So, it's very obvious, grasses blow in the wind, but you don't get that from every different type of plant. So grasses really add that sense of movement to your design. You can find grasses in different heights, textures, colors. Other things they do, they also soak up rainwater, help reduce runoff. And then again, as I mentioned, adding organic matter to your soil. And also with that many roots, it helps provide more airflow in the soil as well. So we've been adding a lot of different grasses. We've had Little Luke for a while. This is a little blue stem, but it's much shorter. And then Haha Tonka, has anyone seen that one? Okay, it's a little blue stem that is very hairy. It's a selection from a park down south, but people have been going wild for it just because of the hairy texture that really catches the light and the water, so it creates this dramatic effect in the garden. And as I was mentioning, you can get different heights, textures, and then pretty different colors. So if you're feeling like there's just too much of that basic green in your garden, look for something that has more blue tones, like this is little blue stem sandhill, little red fox we like as well, and then smoke signal. The debate's out on that one. We've heard good things and bad things about that. So that's a little bit of the struggle with these different varieties. The plant industry is almost like, the fashion industry, where they're trying to do the next thing. They're trying to keep breeding, keep coming up with these new ideas, and not everything is tried, tested, and true. So that's another thing that Pete really is adamant about, using cultivars that have shown that they last the test of time. But of course, we love to experiment and play, so we're always trying new plants. Many of these are actually bred by a local grower, Brent Horvath from Intrinsic Gardens. And then with that, I mentioned grass-like species, which in this case, I'm gonna mostly reference sedges, so different carex species. They provide a really soft texture. They're a cool season growing plant, so meaning they put on their growth in the spring and the fall. So you get that early season greening versus the little blue stem, the big blue stem, those prairie grasses. They're warm season, so they start putting a lot of that growth on later on in the summer. And then you can see here in this example how having that kind of nice soft bottom layer then helps highlight the toad lily that is intermixed in there. And then sedges also are great for wildlife. They provide a lot of habitat services as well. And then being low and spreading, they're covering the ground so we can reduce the chance of weeds coming in. We now have 20 different species of carex in the garden, so we're testing a lot of different ones, because if you have a tough spot that you're struggling with, there might be a sedge for you. There's one for many different situations. And so a couple of our favorites are the Penn sedge, Pennsylvania sedge. We've gotten a couple locations, and that one is more of a runner. So it'll kind of pop up and just be really loose, versus something like the Carex albicans that you saw before, or Carex bromoides is a clumping plant. So you can choose based on your need if you want something more spreading or more clumping. Another one, Carex woodii, it has more of a blue tone. So again, when you're looking for that different color, that is a great option. And then Carex eburnea we're really liking because it has a super, super fine texture. So I highly recommend going to the Mount Cuba Center. They do different plant trials. It's somewhat similar to Chicago Botanic Garden has their plant trials as well. But Mount Cuba recently did a Carex trial, and they have a whole Excel sheet of how these different Carexes rated in their trial. So it's really just kind of a helpful guide. And then I will say prairie dropseed is probably one of the most iconic grasses in Lurie Garden. It's clumping, it's weaving through a lot of the light plate, being that kind of connector plant, suppressing weeds. The seed heads are fragrant. Some people say it smells like popcorn. I think it has a more of a like cardamom smell to me, but adds a nice fragrance in the fall. And then the birds really like the seeds as well. And then it has a great fall color. It goes from green to this kind of like golden yellow. So really, really beautiful. We talked about different types of plants, and now arranging and putting them together. I would break it down just for the sake of simplicity into block planting and matrix planting, and you can see this in Lurie Garden, as well as once you walk around, you'll notice it in other gardens as well. So block planting, meaning one single species planted 50 to 100 or whatever in one group of a single species. And some of the pros of this is that those groupings can then be repeated across the design, and then a pattern is very clear. And they're also very useful. You can see in newer garden, this is a somewhat newer garden that Pete Outhoff designed in Germany, and you can very clearly see the blocks here. And then as you're looking at it, you can see this is the same, this is the same, this is the same. So you can see that repetition across the garden. And then also, depending on your time commitment for your garden, planting in blocks can be really useful for management. It's often simpler management, less time consuming, because it's very obvious when you look at a block of plants, like it's one plant species. So if there's one, weed in there, you're gonna see it very quickly and very easily. And then also a block style planting design is pretty legible and clear to the average person. So if you're trying to say, do a more naturalistic style, use more natives, this is a way for it to be a little bit more approachable to the average person. This garden here in the Netherlands is cared for by volunteers. This is another Pete Outhoff design. And again, thinking about who is going to be taking care of the garden. Is it a company? Is it volunteers? Is it you? And what amount of time do you have can help then dictate what design you have. Most of us always start with what's our design, what are the plants we want, but it's really helpful to take a step back and think, what can I dedicate to my garden? How much time do I actually have? And trying to be realistic about it, which is hard, as we know. And then lastly, so if your goal is to adhere strictly to a design, blocks can be really helpful. And then you can start with blocks and then build complexity over time as well. So you can start with one species, add pops in of another one, and kind of slowly work your way towards a more diverse garden. This portion of Lurie Garden was all block planting to start. And you can see here in Pete's original design, all those bubbles on the top there, those are all blocks of plants. And the other key consideration when you're doing block style planting is an individual plant's habit. Some plants are going to tell you, I want to be in a group with my friends only. I don't want these other ones in here because of how they grow and expand. For example, this Allium Summer Beauty that forms a big, thick mat. There is space in between those plants, but it will be a slowly expanding clump, and it really prefers to kind of be in a group of its own. Also, in the case of Blunt Mountain Mint, these roots are runners. They're rhizomatous, spreading outward. It has very quick growth, so considering the habit and also considering the speed at which a plant does grow and expand is very important. So, like many mints, this one grows very fast and prefers, again, to be in a group of itself. This is Botanica, or previously Stackies. This one plays well with others more so than the previously mentioned, but really due to its size, its stature, having just kind of one here, one there, it doesn't look quite as impactful as a group of them together. It can kind of get lost if it's alone, so this is another good one to group and at least a few together. Amsonia is another block. So that is, again, a connector throughout Lurie Garden. So that's kind of the constant in this space. And that tells you that this design is intentional, somebody planned this, and then you have a lot more kind of diversity winding between. Also, that fall color. Again, then you can see how it sort of anchors that whole space with the Sporobolus popping up between it. I love Amsonia just a little too much. Okay, so getting to that other style, Matrix, there's a higher level of complexity. It's very exciting, requires a higher level of management. So more time is needed, and in this case, you're a little more comfortable with that kind of messy feel and up for some more improvisation. Many of Pete's gardens throughout are, I would say, kind of a mix between block and matrix. There's a lot more intermingling that goes on as they age because you're allowing for spontaneity, allowing for more mixing. So you see a lot of examples of that kind of intermingling. This is Pete's home garden in Netherlands. And again, it can be up to you as the manager of your garden. In Lurie, we started with just that southern area was the only matrix style planting. That's known as the meadows. And when I say matrix, you start with a base layer of grasses, sedges, and that goes in first, and then you have other species popping up randomly through that. So much more randomized arrangement. And so this area, I previously mentioned, is the meadows. It expanded a bit over time, less of that kind of funny shape. And as you can see, it's quite mixed, and we'll come back to this in a little bit. Here's a newer design we did in one corner of the garden. This is a woodland matrix. So starting with that base of Carex bromoides, Carex plantagenea, that's all the yellow there, so all that kind of intermix. And then you've got the perennials popping through here. I have used the analogy before, tell me if it's still good or not, a gallery wall in your house. So you paint the wall one color, that's your grass or your sedge as your base, and then you start putting up your framed works of art, and those are the perennials popping through. So that is the basic idea, and that's that area coming along. It's still pretty new, and that is it a little later on. So I would say this is more of an example of intermingled planting. So here we get small groupings that are working together. And the meadow area that I mentioned, we are redoing that area with a new design, and it will be a true matrix. Okay, now repetition is very important in the garden, and I'm looking at my time. Ooh. All right, so repeating similar elements will help your garden feel cohesive, and choosing the right plant to do that with can be, it can be easy, or you want to think of it as something that is structural, can stand alone, and will take up a little bit of space. So we've done this with some solitary plant groups, such as this Vernonia Summer Swan Song. I really love this plant, highly recommend. These plants want space. They want to be fully appreciated. They're the prima donnas, if you will. So here we are using it in different combinations throughout the garden. And so when I started at Lurie, we had Vernonia in these 3 locations, and now we've added different dots. And that gives it that cohesive look across the space. Haha Tonka, which I mentioned before, is another character that we're using, repeating across the garden just because of how distinct it is. This space was really pretty flat and needed that verticality, so we added the Haha Tonka in here. And then in another corner, another area, same thing, started here and then built on that. And then Pete really loves the element of surprise, so having just kind of a pop of a color, or if something is a really showy plant, just using it in small amounts so that people, when they walk by, they really do the head turn of like, oh my God, what is that? So some plant examples for doing that with are Asclepias tuberosa, due to that bright orange color, and then the Scarlet O'Hara poppy, that red one, is just tucked in here and there. The other great thing about these elements of surprise that you might pop around your garden is that often they go with a variety of different plant species. So this bottle gentian looks good with so many different things. And we create different rules for different plants in the garden. And this one can really be wherever it wants because it's so dang cute. This is another good one to use as just in a smaller amount dotting around. And then we've slowly added some spring ephemerals that are other little pops of surprise. And don't forget to have some quiet moments in your garden as well. It's okay if not every area is just bursting at every point in the season. It's important to give the eye like some space to rest and just have that clean softness. You don't have to pack it in necessarily. Different areas will have their moment over time. So in caring for a garden like this, we view our style as it's ecological gardening, and we do adaptive design, meaning that we're constantly working on the design, changing it, evolving it, keeping that same original intention going, but updating it as needed. And While we have often talked about caring for our gardens as garden maintenance, we really think of it more as garden management. Management means mindful tending. It gives power to the garden caretaker. You are the artist, you are the decision maker, you're the one to say, no, there is too much of that there, you can't be over there. Versus maintenance is really something that's more scheduled, often applies to hardscape elements, and really implies staticity. I can't say that word. But so that quote there, orderly frames are maintained, plantings are managed, and what we mean by orderly frames are things like that shoulder hedge, which really help highlight the complexity of the garden because of that clean, smooth background. Another view of the hedge where that kind of restricts you as you enter the garden, and then it opens up, and we have hedging kind of over in that woodland area as well. The paths are post-consumer granite, so it's a really beautiful texture. We keep those nice and clean. And we still do have a couple lawn areas. This is a Rebecca McMacken quote where she sees lawns as area rugs rather than wall-to-wall carpet. They can be an accent. They're very useful. They're nice to have, but using them with intention. And then also, rather than deadheading plants, as you've seen, we let everything go to seed. We watch its full cycle, and that's to provide food for wildlife. And some things are prolific seeders, so we manage that through what we call editing. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to breeze through the cutback a little bit. Some fun wildlife pictures. The key point here is that we try to provide a bit of different habitat for wildlife. So in some areas we use the mower, and some we just cut it by hand. And then we've identified using the University of Minnesota, they have some great resources, identifying which plant species are suitable for stem nesting insects. And then we mark off those plants in the garden. You can see them flagged here. And then those are cut to 24 inches because the stem nesting bees then go into that cut, into the stem. They lay their eggs, the larvae, and then they take a full year and a half to reproduce. So when you do this in the spring, make sure to remember those same areas you marked, make a map, and then you want to protect those same areas again because then they're not going to emerge until that following spring. So it's like a year and a half. We use a variety of tools, and then all of the material just stays in place, and that is our natural mulch. We do have to do a little bit of finessing. Some areas it's too thick, and we spread that out and chop it up a little bit more, but we leave it to a level where we feel confident that that will decompose pretty readily. Those are those stem nesters, and then here's a shot of the bulbs coming up around the stems. So pretty quickly the garden hides those stems if you don't really like the look. We don't use any pesticides, we don't trap rodents, and we just kind of deal with wildlife damage as it comes. With insects, we encourage a diversity of insects so that they manage their own levels. If we have an aphid issue, we hope that's controlled by the insect community. Watering, we use a soil probe, and we're constantly checking the soil, watering when we have to, but because it is kind of a large container, we do have to water. But gardens evolve over time, and a little bit more about some of the changes that we're doing in the garden. Just a helpful kind of diagram of why you might need to make a change in your garden. Some obvious, a tree gets bigger, you feel like something's missing, you're frustrated with a certain area, or your designer, if you have one, imparts their opinion. Some of our strategies are adding a new character, so a new plant species, simplifying areas, starting over, experimenting. Here's a good example of the space changing. So this was early on when the garden was installed, and that's that same area now. And then